a vastly better known predecessor here in this room was Julius Malema. He addressed the press club here, and I sat over there, as I well recall, and he exuded uncharacteristic charm. When you think of the way there were fistfights in Parliament and abuse of the Speaker, which in the National Party days you'd get rusticated and various other things would happen to you. And he said in an aside, as I recall, and my daughter Janet and I were talking about it just recently, that this place, Kelvin, had the smell of old money. That was, I think, perhaps fairly good spotting by Julius. It shows that his capacity to observe reality, is improving slightly, but it deserves the reply that he has since shown an equally good nose for new money, as we see from the VBS, Mutual Bank, non-existent Mutual Bank, and other news. Maybe the difference now is that we all, Malema included, have the smell of no money because of the way a lot of things have gone and various woes inflicted on us, from load shedding to coronavirus. The latter impoverishing key industries like travel, markets, and threatening the health of all humanity, possibly. May we all emerge soon from the present turmoil and use money we could rightly be earning for our country to have it spread more equally among all our people in society, because the alternative is simply social unrest and instability in South Africa. That's our choice. That said, I would like to say just a few words about the book 8,000 Days that I spent quite a long time writing, 10 years in all. My title reflects simply that I worked in governance for 22 years after journalism, and you multiply that by 365 days and you get 8,000. That period followed my 4 decades in journalism, 16 of them at the Cape Times editing, and writing. I worked out about 4,000 editorials and sundry other items. More speeches, more editorials written than speeches that I ever wrote. I thought up scores of other titles to describe my book, including plays on the word herd, which happens to be my surname, that lend themselves to very catchy uses in headlines and titles. And I considered that the single word SPAD, because I was a special advisor and they were called SPADs when I was in government, was a bit vague and too close to the posh KZN school goings on, not far from where I was at primary school at Treverton and wherever, in the book called Spud. So I left Spud on one side and SPAD, and I called it 8,000 Days. It was conceived, as I said, 10 years ago, when I was contemplating the end of an exciting government career. For me, it has been, it was effectively begun, that career, in 1994, when democracy arrived and Professor Kader Asmal said to me at a friend's birthday party, "Would you like to join me in my ministry?" Now, since he certainly was not a man of the cloth, I thought, well, this means government. So I joined him as an advisor in his Ministry of Water Affairs and Forestry. I would never have contemplated such a job in the old apartheid order. I was never once invited to Tynhuis for banquets and things in the old days. And I'm quite proud of that. But I jumped at this, inspired by the new team at the helm of the country led by Nelson Mandela. They were unbelievably heady and marvelous days. Much later, towards the end of my years in government, I was lucky to have stints in Washington, D.C. and at Oxford, which helped me to get my ideas in shape for what you see here, the book. It was a long gestation, but it's now around. The cover was conceived by my computer-savvy son-in-law, Steve Pike, who's on my right, who is here today and deserves more than routine thanks. And plus, a close and loving extended family gave me encouragement in the midst of the encircling gloom of writing a book based on fact. I think it may be easier to write a book not based on fact, but it was encircling gloom at times. Most notably, my journalist daughter, Janet, who's also there, and my partner of 21 years, Jane Porter. They were quite intimately involved, not only with me, but with the book. I had views from friends and journalistic colleagues. Prominently, one of those was the author John Maddison, who said to me, "Tony, I'll turn this into a book." Well, he did pretty well, and he helped. And some early and rather critical but useful advice from Professor Anton Harber, which helped me quite substantially. And then there was co-publisher Brent Meersman of Printers Inc., always driven and full of ideas. Yet, of course, I take full responsibility for everything in that book. As an editor, I had that responsibility in a newspaper, and now I'm responsible for everything there. So you will no doubt alert me to error or perspectives over which you disagree with me, which would be marvelous to hear disagreement. Much more interesting to hear than agreement. I would note that writing in my book, writing is in my blood. My family having written in print in South Africa for just on 100 years. Notably Janet, who's with Daily Maverick, my brother Raymond, who wrote from Canada and Washington for years, and before that my parents, George and Vida Hurd, the former having disappeared, that's my father, without trace in 1945, after bravely exposing pro-Nazi activities in South Africa in the early war years in the Sunday Times, and having Ossewa Brandwag members sent to internment camps for 3-4 years. It looks to me like they got him when they came out. That story will be told. In brief, 8,000 days spans my time in government service from Mandela's inspiring administration, and ending with what one can only describe as the disastrous Zuma 1. That, for the ANC, is a pretty slippery slide down Disraeli's greasy pole of politics, and I had seen it peak under Thabo Mbeki, with nearly 70% of the electorate behind him at elections, but no yen or need to change the constitution, which could have been done easily. I hope it peaks again under Cyril Ramaphosa. I believe he has the negotiating skills to hang in there with the building blocks that he's placing to give us a better life. But I think the jury is still out. My role in government almost throughout was as a special advisor, a SPAD, two of which each minister in power can appoint as of right, without panel selection and dispensing with most of the usual public service formalities. It's quite a controversial system, and it was developed in Britain, India, and other democracies elsewhere to give ministers, often up against formidable bureaucracies, extra eyes and ears, arms and legs, and the stomach to be able to hold their own with the yes minister obscurantism that can so often mark public service. Ministers are small, they have small staffs, 12. Departments are 35, 40,000 people and more, and the special advisors are those who are dedicated to that minister and help them to do their job. SPADs ideally have to submerge their own personalities in loyal service to the principal, with a capital P, and that is to ministers and presidents. When things go wrong, they are readily at hand for what human relations practitioners in my day, many years ago, would call kita, K-I-T-A. You don't hear much of that today. It's simply kick in the arse. Human relations were a little bit more rough and ready in those days. Maybe these days they veer slightly too much in the other direction. And when things go right in office, in government, the principals are naturally keen to grab the limelight. Human beings and human nature being what it is, but there's also room for some basking in reflected glory by advisors. And I did a bit of basking in those few occasions. Some of my speech drafts actually were delivered verbatim by Thabo Mbeki, which is an achievement. Two, one in London and one in Cape Town, because he regarded speeches as drafts to play with and weave around, and then to reason together with people when he delivered them. And I just wish he hadn't done it to that extent on the issue of AIDS. He should have been more resolutely just leading the charge against AIDS without getting into a knot, which we can discuss later if you want to raise it. My first principal was Kader Asmal. I must say a few words about him. He was an impoverished urchin in Stanger originally, dressed in sacks by his mother. And he ended up heading up humanities at Trinity College Dublin for a decade and returning from exile as one of Mandela's trusted lieutenants. That's when I took the leap, like that chap Emile Knievel, over the Snake River Canyon in the United States. And he went all the way across. Fortunately for him, the parachute opened too soon, so he didn't get it right. And I felt a bit like him when I took the leap from journalism to government, which prompts a lot of thoughts which one can discuss at any stage. I managed to save most of my friends in journalism, and it was tough. So all I can say about Kader was, and a separate book should be done on him, life was a whirlwind of activity and delivery. He was totally driven to achieve, at the end of each day, the scrawled objectives that he set for himself the night before, sometimes on wine-soaked A4 lined paper. He expected those around him to deny themselves to achieve ministerial success, and he got that. He was an example of dedicated public duty, and I make no excuse for making him one of the heroes of the book. Now, he won the Water Prize in Stockholm, the World Water Prize, and went on to education, where, as he put it, he said, he wondered whether any sane person would subject themselves to the pressures and controversies of the education sector. It's an awfully difficult job. And he didn't have a separate minister to handle basic education. He had to handle both higher and basic. He spent most of his time on higher, but that in a way was his first love. And he said he hoped he made some difference. Well, I think he made some difference, but I think he needed 2 terms in office, not 1. I just would like to say, if anyone wants to discuss Thabo Mbeki and the AIDS issue, it's all in the book, but I'll happily exchange ideas with you. We had a lot of other things grinding at us in the presidency. One was Robert Mugabe's snake-like maneuvers across the Limpopo in Zimbabwe. it grieved me to see a breakthrough achieved by Mbeki in his dying days in office, wherein the opposition leader, Morgan Tsvangirai, actually became Prime Minister, and there he was standing next to me in Tuynhuys, Prime Minister of Zimbabwe, but sadly, only in name, with Mugabe having double-crossed everyone, and that did not work, and it's quite a sadness to me that we didn't get what we needed in Zimbabwe then, and still need now, at that stage. I hope quite a few of you will benefit from and enjoy a popularly written but seriously intended books with remarkable, I believe, cartoons, published cartoons by Zapiro. There's nog 'n piep for almost everything I say and feel in Zapiro. Here's a way of summing things up just with a few strokes. And I'm deeply indebted to him for making those available to me. So if you get bored reading the book, you'll find a cartoon. Thank you.